The Locked On Podcast Network presents the College Sports Big 3 in 30. The three biggest stories in college sports. From our local experts at the Locked On Podcast Network. We bring you the real story. Why it matters, what's next, who wins the big game, and more, all in 30 minutes. The College Sports Big 3 in 30 starts now with the biggest story in college sports.
The number 5 player in the country, Jason Crowe Jr., commits to the University of Missouri.
You are Locked On Mizzou, your daily podcast on the Missouri Tigers.
I'm already looking forward to Jason Crowe Jr.'s first year in a Missouri Tiger basketball uniform as the number 5 player in the country, according to a 24/7 Sports, has committed to Dennis Gates and Missouri. This found out just about an hour ago as I record here, and I gotta say, the more I think about this is the biggest coup, I think, recruiting-wise in football or even in basketball or football. Regardless, those two major sports, I really think this is bigger than Luther Burden III. I think this is bigger than Michael Porter Jr. I think it's bigger than Jeremy Maclin. I'm talking about in the moment, by the way. When these guys made their decision, I think this is an even bigger deal. And here's why. Because, well, some of you are saying, hey, just on the basketball side, well, Michael Porter Jr. was number 1 in the country for a lot of his recruitment. Ended up, I think, second by most accounts. Certainly by 24/7 Sports, the same measure that I just used for Jason Crowe Jr., well, he was the number 2 player in the entire country. And yet, we can quibble about who was the bigger recruit there. If you want to say the 6'10" Porter was an even bigger talent at that time, I won't argue with that. Here's what I will argue. To go into Inglewood, California, and get a player of that caliber is really unprecedented in the history of Missouri basketball, certainly in the modern era. Since let's say 2000, the late 90s or so, when recruiting, the internet popped up. Let's just say in the internet era. That's a pretty good way to delineate it, really, is to draw that line there, because once the internet came along, well, a bunch of new websites and blogs and obviously social media comes along, and now high school recruiting is just followed on such a different level. So I'm not going to speak to, the Stepanovich and Sunvold high school recruitment. I just don't think that's quite the same comparison, and frankly, I don't have the knowledge or the archives there to go back and compare it. So let's just say in the last 25, 30 years or so, to be able to go out of state, of course, Michael Porter Jr. from Columbia, Missouri. Well, what a great stroke of luck that was for Missouri for a bunch of different reasons, obviously. So to be able to go into Inglewood, California, which I don't know if you've looked at a map lately, that's quite a long ways from Columbia. To be able to get that young man, again, this isn't Luther Burden III, who grew up in St. Louis. This isn't Dorial Green Beckham, who grew up in Springfield. This isn't Blaine Gabbert or Sheldon Richardson, who grew up in the St. Louis area. This isn't Kareem Rush, who was a Kansas City guy. This is a guy who is a bona fide McDonald's All-American, and not just a McDonald's All-American, a guy who's probably going to start in the game as well. Missouri just does not get those type of guys unless they just happen to be from Columbia or somewhere pretty close. And even then, well, it's still a little shaky. So my point here is for Dennis Gates, who has certainly, last season was obviously Dennis Gates' best year as a coach yet. Unfortunately, the NCAA tournament was a disappointment. So for him to get this type of buy-in from this type of player who obviously has no real ties to Missouri other than, well, I believe there's some ties. I brought up Kareem Rush. I believe there is some ties. Maybe Jason Crowe Sr., his father, I think maybe knows Kareem Rush a little bit. So, hey, tip of the cap there to a friend of the show and a former Locked On Mizzou guest in Kareem Rush. But, hey, I just think to be able to get this guy from out of state and out of your geographical area, somebody who is this high of a caliber, give me an example of that. Really? We got to go back to, was Tony Van Zandt the running back in the day? Where was he from? He was from the St. Louis area, right? Am I wrong about that? Again, I'm not going to Google this really quickly. I'm sure you'll all be screaming at me if I got that wrong. The point here is that this is an incredible day for Missouri recruiting. In fact, it doesn't get any better than this in terms of Missouri recruiting. So let's celebrate. I know, Friday, it's happy hour. I'll let you go here really soon, but we got more to get to here on Locked On Mizzou, including some football. Of course, Eli Drinkwitz was, yes, behind the lectern and on the podium yesterday in Atlanta at SEC Media Days, being his usual hilarious and often hilarious and usually likable self. And I just thought it was interesting that, of course, Eli Drinkwitz aligning himself with, yes, the Big Ten's playoff structure, not the SEC's playoff structure. Yes, he's sort of playfully acting like this is going to get him into the doghouse with SEC Commissioner Greg Sankey. But you know what? It was interesting. Drinkwitz, his plan was, I wouldn't say convoluted, but it was complicated enough that, well, some people aggregated his plan, tweeted out some sort of sketchy details of what Drinkwitz was saying, which caused Drinkwitz to then fire back at those people on social media. I just think it's amazing how Drinkwitz was able to own the room, and gosh, he's just such a natural at these things. The guy is a star, and more important than that, for the purposes of this discussion, he's a salesman. He knows how to make himself, famously, he'll be self-deprecating and be the first one to tell you he's not the tallest guy in the world, but he makes himself look big all the time. I promise you that. And to the point of him being a salesman, well, obviously he's a pretty good recruiter for the most part. That's how he's made his bones for his first few years at Missouri. But you notice how, again, to the salesman part of it, notice how no one in SEC Media Days, to my knowledge, is talking about Missouri's lackluster high school recruiting ranking for 2026. That could have been a big talking point if that momentum were to have gathered on itself, if somebody would have started asking those questions. But when Eli Drinkwitz is out there going, well, hey, maybe we should keep the SEC championship game, but have the third and sixth place teams in the conference play and the fourth and fifth place teams play for those last two automatic qualifying bids in the conference. Or maybe get rid of the SEC championship game and have a 2 versus 8, a 3 versus 7, and a 4 versus 6, whatever the heck, 4 versus 5, whatever the heck the format is there. Again, just a little bit complicated enough that I don't want to throw it all out there for you, especially in audio form. But my point here is that Drinkwitz, once again, positions himself, well, he does a couple things. He positions himself as a big star and a really important guy to the point where a lot of my colleagues who are at SEC Media Days are comparing him to Steve Spurrier. Hey, he's the new Steve Spurrier. Well, I don't think that's an accident. Drinkwitz wears that visor on top of his head for a reason. He famously loves Steve Spurrier. And also, again, there's a method to his madness here. I think he's trying to control the narrative, and he wants the narrative to not be, hey, what's up with Missouri's lackluster recruiting rankings? Because it seems like all anybody wants to talk about, the team that's right behind Missouri in the recruiting rankings, well, that's Hugh Freeze at Auburn. All anybody wants to talk about is, why does he play golf so much? And why isn't he why isn't he recruiting better? And aren't you playing too much golf? And just the umpteenth amount of jokes we've heard about that. Well, I just think Drinkwitz does a lot better job of controlling the media and controlling the narrative, and does it beautifully at Media Days.
Summer sports are in full swing, and whether you're about baseball under the lights, check. Golf on the green, check. Or high-stakes soccer action, check. FanDuel is the best way to make every game even more exciting. You're already following the action. Why not make it a little more thrilling? With FanDuel, you can get in on the game with your friends while they're getting sunburned on the beach. I've been using FanDuel to track my favorite matchups. Cashed Russell Henley, top 10 at the Open Championship. It's easy to use, fast to pay out, and makes even regular season games feel like a must-watch. Scotty Scheffler running away with the Open Championship. I still got to see if Russell Henley gets in the top 10. I was locked in, or should I say locked on. New to FanDuel, new customers can bet just $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if your first bet wins. Open the FanDuel app today or visit FanDuel.com to get started.
Ole Miss got their guy, and Lane Kiffin is absolutely primed to make a run over the next 3 weeks.
You are Locked On Ole Miss, your daily podcast on the Ole Miss Rebels.
We kick things off with a major commitment weekend. Craig Tutt has chosen Ole Miss, giving Lane Kiffin serious momentum heading into the biggest recruiting period of the year. We're free and available on all the podcast apps and on YouTube. Thank you for making Locked On Ole Miss your first listen every day, and a special hello to the insiders and everydayers who make this show what it is. Do us a favor, hit like, hit subscribe, hit comment on this video. It costs absolutely nothing, but keeps every video on this channel free. And don't forget to check out a second listen on the network. Nearly every team, college or pro, is ready for you. This episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use the code LOCKEDONCollege at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. Really interesting stuff, and I'm kind of fired up about what happened because Craig Tutt committed to Ole Miss over the weekend. The player out of Murfreesboro, Tennessee, committed to the Rebels over the Auburn Tigers and the Tennessee Volunteers. He says 6 foot, 180-pound safety, but more importantly, just like Jet Goldsberry, he is kind of a super athlete. I talked about how Oakland High School in Murfreesboro, Tennessee will go as far as Craig Tutt will take them. He's the best quarterback on the team, the best running back, the best wide receiver, the best tight end, the best linebacker, the best cornerback, the best safety, because he is the best athlete on the field. He has never stepped on a high school field, in my opinion, to where he was the less talented player. Ole Miss is getting somebody that has the potential to develop extremely early. Until he does get developed, he is going to be an absolute star on special teams. He is somebody that is in a very good position for Ole Miss, and this is really the most important period of the year for Ole Miss in high school recruiting. And we'll talk about what's coming down the line, but the next 3 weeks of high school recruiting is going to shape the entire narrative for Lane Kiffin in high school recruiting for him. Craig Tutt was a 4-star, nearly a top 100 player on Rivals. That is Rivals and On3. They're all kind of together now. Ranked 4 stars by 247, a 3-star by ESPN. Like I've said in many of these videos, when there are anomalies in the rankings, it could be opinion differences. It could also be something as little as he went to Adidas camps as opposed to Under Armour camps. He went to Nike camps as opposed to Adidas camps. Stuff like that matters in a recruiting ranking that is so subjective. But they do think very highly of this guy, and whenever you look at his film, you can see why. He is the best athlete on the field. Doesn't matter who they're playing against. I have never seen anybody out-athletic Craig Tutt. He is somebody that Tennessee wanted. And he is from an orange area. I talked about on Friday. He is going to be a battle all the way up into December and beyond because Murfreesboro, Tennessee is a very orange city. And more so than Nashville, which has a little bit of crimson that dips into that fan base as well. Murfreesboro, though, is a very orange place. Very Tennessee Vols. And if Tennessee remains interested, Tennessee is going to press him all the way up until signing day. So him committing to Ole Miss, it's not over. I talk all the time. The important thing in recruiting is not necessarily landing the kid. It's finishing in the top 2. Because after you sign with a university, you have 9 opportunities to transfer away. You want to be on that list just in case you don't get him to start with. That is my opinion on high school recruiting. High school recruiting is still very, very important. And in this realm, you need to talk about it. But the difference in the way it used to be and the way it is now is the entry point is the commitment. And Craig Tutt committed to Ole Miss. He is somebody that can line up and do exactly what you want him to do. I see him at the safety position. He is somebody that turns into potentially another Trey Washington on the back end of the defense, calling the signals, going sideline to sideline. That is where I see him. He is being recruited as a safety. Jet Goldsberry is being recruited as a safety. If you go back last year, they got Keon Young, Cortez Thomas, and Ladarian Clardy at the safety position. They want options on that end of the field, and there are different types of players. I've mentioned that Ladarian Clardy and Craig Tutt favor each other with the way they play the game. They're the best athletes that have stepped on the field together in one place at Ole Miss. But that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to transfer over to starting or fitting in with a defense, because it's not always the best players that play on a defense. It's oftentimes the right players. Craig Tutt has the advantage of all of the athletic gifts going into this fall. That is why you should not sleep on this player. He can do all of the stuff you want him to do. He's an unbelievable athlete. He is somebody that when he walks on campus at Ole Miss, he will expect playing time the first year. He's going to look on and say, okay, they're graduating Sage Ryan and Wynette Williams and those guys at safety. I think I can ease on in there. I'm just as good as Keon Young or Cortez Thomas or Ladarian Clardy or Jet Goldsberry. I think there's a chance that I have to go start as a true freshman. And I think Craig Tutt literally believes he can play that. And Lane Kiffin has shown if you are good enough, they will play you. It isn't one of those things to where seniors always go. If you are absolutely good enough, you're going to be on the field, but they will not tolerate busts. They will not tolerate mistakes. You have to study and be available at an extremely high level. That's the reason freshmen can struggle at times. And whenever you get the opportunity, you take it. The difference in this, I'd like to point out, is Caden Lee and Aiden Williams came in at the same time. Aiden Williams had a ton of hoopla. He made the Under Armour All-American game. He came in, didn't necessarily make big plays, didn't make big plays at all. Had a really bad penalty against Tulane, and his playing time went off a cliff after that. On the flip side of that, Caden Lee kept working. And when he got called on, he produced in a really big way against the number one defense in the entire country. That is the difference. When they give you the opportunity, you make plays. And Craig Tutt, like I said, has all the athletic ability known to man, essentially, and can go a really long way with what he is doing. I'm really excited to see exactly where it goes with Craig Tutt, because he has a chance athletically to be pretty special on the back end of that defense if he develops. There's been a lot of athletes that didn't quite develop. Everybody remembers Tig Barksdale. Everybody remembers Nick Brazel. When they get to Ole Miss, you expect high things. There are expectations, and they just never come about, really. Craig Tutt is going to go at least into that category to where there will be expectations whenever he gets on campus. I expect this player to be a very good player immediately for Pete Golding's defense. And it's needed, because if you look at the safety position right now, it's transfer portal all the way at this point, but you want Keon Young, Cortez Thomas, Ladarian Clardy, at least 2 or 3 of those guys. You need to hit on them. With the young guys coming in behind them, you want high school recruiting to be more important than it is. It needs to be more important than the transfer portal, according to all of these people around the country. For that to happen, you need the safety position. You need to hit on those athletes to get ready. If not, you're going to be doing the same thing next year, but it'll be Craig Tutt and Jet Goldsberry and those guys playing back as a safety. So we'll see exactly how that goes and where Ole Miss sits, honestly.
Ever wish managing your money felt easier? Maybe the Cincinnati Bengals do. With Monarch Money, it can. Whether you're growing your savings or planning a big purchase, Monarch puts you in the driver's seat. It's like having your own personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money is more than a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place. So in addition to managing your money, you're also building wealth. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNFL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNFL for half off your first year.
You are Locked On Huskies, your daily podcast on the Washington Huskies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
We got to talk about the guy who just committed here on Sunday, 3-star defensive back Rahsjon Duncan, who got a massive ratings bump from 247 Sports, and he's on the verge of becoming a 4-star prospect right now.
Again, trust the evaluation. This is why when we talked about, you might miss on Devon Benjamin, but it's not necessarily we're just going to take a consolation prize with Rahsjon Duncan. No, this is a fantastic addition for Washington. And I think, again, anytime you can get a long outside cornerback who also, as we've talked about, could play a couple of different positions, but just another solid addition to really round out that defensive back class, the secondary. And you get a third true outside corner that you can just look and say, you know what? Whatever happens down the road, we know we're in good hands.
So I disagree with you on one thing there. I agree with the evaluation stuff. I agree with all that. He's not a true outside corner. And I think that's the most fun thing about him is he could turn into one. I don't think you're wrong there. But that's one of the really fun things when you watch his film. I was just talking with our good buddy and coworker over at Huskies Wire, Alex Katzen, about him yesterday. And that's one of the really fun things where Alex watched his film and just says, I wrote about him as a safety because I think he could end up playing there full time with the way he hits, but with the way he also just with his frame and the way he's able to play in press coverage, if he ends up playing outside corner full time, nobody's going to be surprised there as well. And that's the reason you take a kid like this. And it's nice to see the rankings start to back that up as well, which is why I wanted to lead with that. He's jumped like 10, 15 spots in terms of national cornerback rankings, which is where 247 has him right now. And it's one of those things where you look at him and you watch the way he hits and you say, oh, okay, yeah, I can see why he might play safety. And then again, you watch the way he plays on the outside. He can play corner as well. And one of the reasons I don't think that there's going to be a true position designation on him for a little while is the way he plays in run support as well. And this is one of those things where I'm sure there are several people out there saying right now, well, why are you taking another defensive back when you need defensive line help? These two things, for sure. You still need more defensive line help. Nobody's arguing that. We're going to talk about that later on as well. But the most important thing with Rahsjon Duncan, as well as losing 5 defensive backs at the end of the year, Takario Davis, Ephesians Prysock, Mikel Steen, CJ Christian, and Dyson McCutcheon are all graduating at the end of the year. So you need to restock that position. On top of that, and it's something you and I have talked about a lot about with Rashawn Clark as well throughout the spring practices and everything. He is awesome in run defense. He is awesome at filling gaps, tackling, coming downhill, doing all of those things against the run. And that's one of just, those reasons that I don't think a position designation has kind of come about yet, but it's also one of the reasons you go out and you go after this kid no matter what.
Exactly. It's a situation where, the reason why I think he's going to end up being a true outside corner is just based on depth and numbers. And honestly, when I watch his film, for some reason, that Leroy Bryant play at Penn State when he was trying to tackle, I forgot if it was Tyler Warren or somebody, and he kind of just bounced off him. That's not going to happen with Rahsjon Duncan. That just, to me, is not going to happen. And so I just view him as an outside quarterback. But to your point, no matter where he ends up, this is a fantastic addition, where if it's a 4-star safety or 4-star cornerback, you're okay with that take either way because, again, whatever happens, happens. And I think this is a good kind of symbol of let defensive line and set the secondary be mutually exclusive. They're not tied together. Whether, again, you don't need to look at it and say, oh, well, they should have added this position instead of this one. No, add both. That's why you now can say you can close out the secondary class and say, you know what? We're done. We're good. We don't need anybody else. And by the way, we're 30 seconds here. If Celestine Moe ends up wanting to throw his hat in the ring and we call him wide receiver and he plays some safety, that is a completely different story for a different day. I just want to get that out there. But aside from that, you are more than now set at cornerback or safety. And you look at it, think about how CJ Lavender can be versatile. You look at Cassani Giles.
Cassani Giles as well, yeah.
He can be versatile. Elijah Drew is really a true outside corner in this class, which is why I kind of threw Duncan into just, at least for the time being, if you want to.
But Jaron Jones is probably a true outside corner as well.
And that was
my play some nickel too.
And that's why I said 3. That's your third outside corner / true cornerback in a sense, nickel corner, whatever you want to call it. But with all that being said, it's John Richardson now has no cause for concern moving forward. When you talk about the depth, when you talk about the young players, when you talk about what they had to add in the transfer portal, I don't think you will have to either address safety or corner because of these additions. Because if Duncan ends up slotting in at safety down the road with next to Gavin Day, okay, great. And then now you still have Elijah Durr and John Jones. So you're still set there, and you can figure out nickel, because I think that nickel slot, I think no matter what, is always going to be safe down the road. But you look at any of those positions, you no longer have a cause for concern, and now you can turn your full attention to some other position in the class.
So I want to tell a little story here about Rahsjon Duncan and how this came to be, because he was a really late offer. Washington offered him, I believe June 10th was the date, a couple days after Derek Johnson II committed to Oklahoma. He was somebody who, the crystal ball came in for him, and then that crystal ball flipped to Oklahoma, and things obviously happened the way it did. And, obviously there were a lot of people that were frustrated that a legacy from UW ended up elsewhere. And that was understandable. And I remember just as soon as this offer went out, my phone blew up from 2, 3, 4. I can't remember how many people. There were so many people around the program that, and not people directly related either. There's just so many different people that are involved in UW football in one way or another that sent me a note saying, this kid's film is insane. The program is so high on him. And yeah, people are, frustrated about not getting a legacy kid, but if you can close on Rahsjon Duncan, I don't think anybody should be frustrated at the end of the day. And I think that's something to keep in mind here, because when you look at you go watch the film, you see so many different things. And I feel like you and I have talked about this before when talking about his film. There are several plays on his junior tape where he's shutting down another UW pledge in a big physical outside receiver in Deji Ajose, which I think is something to keep in mind, where it's, he can play against those high level physical players that, are big jump ball receivers that also have that great athleticism on the outside, which he does, by the way. I don't have the numbers offhand, but is one of the top runners in the region in terms of the 100 and 200 meter dash, which is always really important to see when you talk about guys that are going to be playing out on the perimeter for you a lot. And even at safety, just to have that high end range is all very, very important. But it's one of those things where I remember seeing people be really concerned about not getting Derek Johnson. But from everything that I was told for a very long time, Rahsjon Duncan was the reason why, where some people just kind of said, maybe, some priorities shifted at a certain point.
I'm glad you framed it in that sense, because it's not we don't want Derek, or it's just, this is a better fit. And I think, fans, it might be kind of hard for them to understand when you think, well, how can you turn out a legacy? Natai Rogers, I know that name is going to be a way, way deep pull for some people. Offensive lineman that ended up going, I think, to South Carolina or somewhere else, who was a son of a UW offensive lineman. Again, you don't just take somebody because they're the son of an alum. It's a bonus. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying you don't take those guys, but when you just look at the evaluation, I think you prefer Duncan, and that's no slight to Derek. I just think there's a more natural fit. Everything just kind of comes together a little more naturally, and I think it's a good opportunity for a guy for you have to keep a guy on the West Coast. You don't really lose anything in this respect, and again, it's just trust the evaluation, trust what's going to work out down the road. And by the way, you don't know how things are going to work out down the road. Maybe Derek decides he wants to transfer to UW too, and you figure that out down the road. Again, I'm not throwing that out there as he might do that. I'm just saying, you build those relationships, and then you trust your evaluation at the time, and maybe you end up with both down the road.